I'd now like to get into the subject of APIs, and this is a hot topic. Wherever I go, I've recently traveled to Japan and to Dubai at various different meetings, and it's consistent. Every operator is like looking at this right now. So how can we engage? How can we work with it? I can think of no better person, Kevin, to introduce us to some of the basics around this topic, so we can start the discussion from a point of understanding the background. Thank you, Kevin.
Can I just say, first of all, what a difficult act to follow that is. So definitely out of my comfort zone here then. So greetings again to those of you that were here yesterday, and hello to those of you that are here today for the first time. So my name is Kevin Moore, and I work for Mpirical. We're a telecoms training company, and my role generally is as a technical trainer, but I do wear other hats in terms of development for internal systems, and also some work with our cloud infrastructure as well. So I tend to have a kind of hand in a few different things. And APIs are particularly interesting for me as somebody who previously worked in web development. I like things to be very, very simple and easy to implement. So I am going to change tact a little bit today from what I discussed yesterday. So yesterday was very much a kind of primer on APIs, and in particular, their implementation in mobile networks. Today, I thought, would be a good opportunity, particularly since we follow this with a panel discussion, to be a little bit more provocative. So some of this may be me playing devil's advocate, but I think we're quite uniquely placed. So we don't have any stake in the game in terms of the success or otherwise of different initiatives such as APIs, network slicing, MEC, etc., as we can see on my magical mobile monetization tree, which may be mythical. And in some ways, we can kind of give an opinion on, an unvarnished opinion on whether we think these things are successful. We also see trends in the market, so we see which courses are particularly popular. So it does make us quite well placed to kind of add commentary and analysis on these things. So I know what some of you are thinking. You're going to sit there and think, hang on, you've clearly used AI to create this image because there's a mistake there. And you might say the mistake is that the road to ROI is pointing nowhere. And that may or may not be a mistake. Unfortunately, ChatGPT, with no amount of prompting, would make that sign point down the road. So make of that what you will. But no, I think the real mistake is that there's actually money falling from this tree, which may be a little bit flippant. But I think the point to make here is that whenever we kind of introduce something new, and I wouldn't necessarily say that network APIs are something new, as I'll talk about in a moment, I think there is a tendency to think, great, how can we monetize this? How can we commercialize this? But the point is that not all innovation necessarily leads to commercialization, certainly not immediately. And I think for each of these technologies, there is certainly merit in them. Some of them, it seems, we've been trying to make a success for quite a long time. And I think the point to make at the outset, yes, I will be a little bit provocative here, but I think we need to, as an industry, not let perfect be the enemy of good. So we implement these things, and we hope that there is demand for them. And I certainly think there is demand with APIs. And it seems to me it's more of a supply-side issue. So what are some of the potential barriers to success then? Well, I think at present, although we've had previous attempts at implementing APIs, it still feels like we're not quite there yet in terms of fully realizing the potential and having a kind of mature API ecosystem in place. So there are a few barriers to success, I think. In terms of pricing, I still think it's quite unclear from a monetization point of view how operators will approach this, what sort of relationships will be built, how we price access to APIs. Is it a volume model? Is it value-led? Do we charge more for perceived higher value APIs? And I think some of the early use cases that we've seen show that there is a demand there. The scale of that demand, I think, is undetermined at this stage. So some of the anti-fraud APIs, clearly there is a benefit there for financial institutions to use these. But my concern would be, how much can you really monetize that? But also, you're potentially taking revenue away from another source in terms of one-time passes, for example. So will you charge more, less, or the same for access via API? And given that security is such a big issue in finance, we may see other developments that would essentially render these APIs not necessarily useless, but there would be other things available. At present, there is no killer app. And I think, again, as an industry, we tend to obsess over use cases. And with APIs, we've got to remember here, an API in and of itself is not a product. It's an interface. It's a conduit to something else. So I don't think we need to obsess internally about killer apps. If there is a killer app out there, we need to simply ensure that we ensure that APIs are available to facilitate that. And again, I guess this leads into the fact that I don't think there is a multitude of use cases at the moment, but I think we build the APIs and hopefully people will come, which is a reference to Wayne's World, if anybody has seen that film. I didn't know if that was a good example or not. And again, I guess connected is an unclear value proposition. How do we commercialize this? How do we package it? How do we ensure that developers have access? And I think the point here from somebody who does development work is it's about being frictionless. So we need to grease the wheels. We need to make sure that, okay, we may not necessarily be defining use cases yet, but actually let's open this up to developers as best we can. And obviously there are limitations in terms of how much we can do that. And I think we've got to be careful because it does feel like we've been here before. No disrespect to anybody in the audience who may have had any involvement in any of these things, but clearly we've evolved and moved on. And I think another thing that we tend to do in this industry is we reinvent things, we rename things. Instead of it being a natural progression, a natural evolution, we say, how can we repackage this? How can we remarket this? It's network APIs now. You know, it's not ParlayX, it's now one API, it's now Open Gateway. And I think that is just a natural evolution. And I think current attempts are moving in the right direction in terms of attempting to rationalize and standardize the way that these APIs are developed and deployed, but we still need to guard against previous mistakes. So some of the potential reasons then that previous attempts at doing this failed. So technical challenges. So in terms of implementation, as somebody who's had web development experience, and perhaps not as much development experience as other people in the room, I shudder at the thought of a SOAP-based API. So RESTful APIs based on HTTP are much simpler for me to understand. And if you think about the explosion in web APIs, it makes sense to kind of move in that direction. There was fragmentation, there were different APIs from different vendors, from different networks. So all in all, quite a fragmented ecosystem, which kind of fits with the structural gaps icon here. So the other thing to bear in mind is sometimes it's about right place, right time. So when Apple launched the App Store, they weren't the first to allow apps on mobile phones, but they were the first to see really the value that could be added there, and that really ties into one of the presenters yesterday mentioned about Apple's way of doing things. So with ecosystem immaturity, perhaps previous attempts were destined to fail simply because the market wasn't ready, developers weren't ready, the use cases weren't there. And many of the APIs that I talked about yesterday, they were available in previous guises, in previous iterations of network APIs. But it's about where the demand exists. Now, how do we meet the key challenges? So, I've tried to identify what I think are the key hurdles that need to be overcome for network APIs to be successful. So, yes, it's nice that we have these federated APIs across different operators, but ultimately there will need to be some aggregation. I know the idea probably is to find that really brilliant enterprise use case that will pay a network lots and lots of money for access, but chances are we want to open this up to lots and lots of smaller developers, and previously that was difficult. A small development team, and bear in mind the kind of agility of today's modern startups, to try and communicate with and negotiate with mobile networks, it's going to be difficult to break through. So we need to ensure that access is there, and that may be through aggregators or system integrators or some other type of aggregation platform. We're moving towards standardization, so things like the Common API framework facilitate that. We need to ensure that solutions are scalable. We need to actually lower the barrier to entry in the same way that hyperscalers do. If I want to try out a product on AWS, for example, I know I've normally got quite a generous free tier, I can try things out, and I can be sure that when the time comes that this is ready to scale. And perhaps the biggest challenge is monetization, as it is with lots of other things. But let's not let that stand in the way. You know, we innovate, we open the ecosystem up. Let's see what other people can come up with. Let's facilitate that access. And that really ties in with the final point on developer engagement. And really the crux of this presentation is we need to engage developers. It's from a business point of view, developers are not interested in a lot of the things that we're all interested in these rooms, in this room. We want to get on with things. We want to get started. Show me the docs and I'll start building something. And I know we have some representatives from CPaaS companies in the room, so I'll try and be nice. So CPaaS really leads the way in owning that developer relationship. So people like Twilio, for example, they were able to see there is demand. So we don't worry about defining the use case. We know there is demand for messaging, for example, and we know that there is a problem. So in terms of access, it's difficult to do. So let's make that easy. And also, I think what Twilio and what other CPaaS companies do well, they understand the developer. They make it easy. It's very, very frictionless. So it's easy to get started, but you make it harder to leave. And I don't say that in a malicious way. Developers want to stay. They buy in. It's buy-in, not lock-in. So as you'll see, telco operators, possibly a bit jealous of some of the revenues that CPaaS companies were able to generate, but they saw the problem, but they were closer to the developer. And in some cases, I don't see that as a big issue. Telco should focus on what they're good at. And developers, I think, it's an incredibly agile ecosystem. They want to move quickly and break things. So this is where I think CPaaS has led the way, and other system integrators. And I don't think it's a case of, as operators, you can't simply copy their homework. If you're a vendor like Nokia or Ericsson, you can try and buy the companies. You know, that's a worthwhile approach. But I think there are things that can be learned from CPaaS, but also there are opportunities for partnerships there. So, in terms of building an effective developer ecosystem, frictionless onboarding, make it as easy as possible to get started, great documentation and tooling. Nothing frustrates me more than bad documentation for an API. There's no excuse for it. So for me, I want to get started quickly with examples. I want to fire up Postman or some other API software and quickly test endpoints, work out requests and responses, but also I'll be digging through the documentation. We need a developer-first culture. It's no good approaching this from a business point of view. Try and understand what the developer needs, facilitate that access. So think like a developer, not like a network engineer, or indeed a business leader. We need a single integration with a global reach. And this is quite a simplistic idea. I don't think we will ever reach a stage where there is a single unified platform that facilitates access across all networks. That's a kind of utopian dream. But the point is that where we can, we attempt to standardize. And the point to make here is that not all applications are global. So it may be that actually on a regional level, it's fine that we have standardization within particular regions because that's what the developer is working in. For global applications, there is an acceptance that yes, it may be, there may be a little bit more work involved in interfacing with these systems. Communities and support. So again, this is what CPaaS companies do well in terms of developer portals, forums, code evangelists, for example, or platform evangelists. And then that last point about ecosystem lock-in. It's easy to build, but it's hard to leave. And it's the same again in cloud. If I build something in AWS and it works, the chances are I'm not going to go anywhere else. And the fact that that was made easy for me to kind of sign up means that the next time I have a problem or the next time I want to try a product, I'm going to go to that same platform. So I think make it easy, make it hard for customers to leave in a good way. They want to stay. There is no reason to go anywhere else. So we do have some early partnerships. And the problem here is that, again, people seem to be creating their own things. Obviously, we've got Aduna now that it's got a name. We've got the aforementioned companies that were obviously bought out by Ericsson and Nokia in Vonage and Rapid API. And obviously, we've got the GSMA Open Gateway, which is doing good work in terms of trying to hold things together. So we do need to guard against fragmentation. Otherwise, we're simply repeating the mistakes of the past. So I mentioned the high-value API classes. I say high value, I'm not necessarily talking in monetary terms. These are the use cases that we're seeing out there that we know we've got a proof of concept for. So we need to build on those. And I think we have to temper expectations. When we think about the data that we can expose from mobile networks, we're still fairly limited. So we need to think about the types of use cases and what data they will need and how we can meet that demand. And really, just as a closing remark, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. It's a supply and demand problem. And I would argue that actually there is a little bit more demand in some areas, but I think this problem has existed where networks say, we're not going to invest unless we know there is demand. In fact, it's an age-old business problem. You know, you're not going to start a business if your customers aren't there, but how will you know if you don't start? And obviously developers, you know, there are other ways that we can get data from systems. Remember, APIs are simply about smoothing that interface and standardizing that connectivity. So I think we need to solve this chicken and egg problem. Somebody needs to move first. Obviously, we've now got network APIs. So I think at this stage, it's over to the developers. And I say developers as in third-party developers. Let's make it easy for them to access these APIs. And hopefully what we see on the back of that is lots and lots of innovation and hopefully some revenue. But that's not the be-all and end-all. Yes, we need to ensure that they're paying their way, these network APIs. But I think we have to be careful in terms of expectations. So yes, APIs have got massive potential. But I think in terms of monetization, let's temper those expectations and let's focus on getting those use cases built first. Thank you.